Alright, so I'm back with another Destiny video after this week's pretty huge TWAB, which was all about Sandbox changes and was very strange. It was a really weird TWAB, and I don't really think it was what anyone was expecting. I wrote an article about this earlier, but I kind of wanted to get a little deeper into it and then also kind of touch on stuff that wasn't addressed, which I found kind of weird. It's a lot of nerfs, like a whole lot of nerfs, and then the buffs they did do are really small, with the possible exception of hand cannons. So hand cannons were the most extensive part of this, where they changed a whole bunch of archetypes. They increased the rate of fire on 110, so that's like a pretty big buff for them. They put range back, and I think all of the hand cannons now have better range than they used to. 180's got like a 37% magazine buff, which is hilarious because that means like Malfeasance is gonna have like 18 or 20 rounds or something nuts like that. So that's pretty fun. But the some of the old powerhouses like Luna's and Not Forgotten got a little bit nerfed because their rate of fire was cut down. And then Sunshot is the only 150 left, so that is a buff by default. But I don't know if we're going to be seeing some sort of huge Sunshot meta in PvE or PvP, so I'm not going to get too excited about that. Some of the nerfs were pretty significant. Falling Guillotine is getting a 24% reduction in heavy attack, which this one I was kind of expecting just because, I mean, which activities have you loaded into and not seen like three to six people rocking Falling Guillotine, like just ready to burn down whatever boss? I think swords will still be pretty strong. They're so good for hacking down champions and certain bosses depending on the mechanics. Falling Guillotine was like just a step above everything else, so I'm not super shocked to see it nerfed there. And I kind of figured this was coming. They fixed the bug part of it where it was doing like extra damage with the whirlwind attack like a couple weeks ago, but it's still just so powerful that there was very few other options in the heavy slot for a lot of activities. So, and I know we're at least getting a new exotic sword of kind of the same archetype, I think, in Beyond Light. So we'll see if maybe that is as good as Falling Guillotine used to be, at the cost of an exotic slot. Really weird nerf was Ruinous Effigy is getting its slam nerfed and also its life drain nerfed. Unless I'm missing something, like I didn't really see that being a huge problem in the game. I don't really understand this. My buddy had a theory that this has to do with something that we just don't know about yet. Like there is some sort of activity or encounter or some sort of interaction with stasis where Ruinous Effigy or stacking 3 to 6 Ruinous Effigies for whatever reason just became too powerful, and so it had to be nerfed for that reason. Usually if that happens, Bungie will like post a little explanation about that, so it was very strange that they didn't really say anything. Like they had this big paragraph about like, this is why, Mountaintop's a problem. This is why we're nerfing Mountaintop. And it was like a paragraph. This was just a nerf that is happening, and that's it. I think more significant than the nerfs is the lack of buffs, which, again, the hand cannons, like the certain hand cannons have been buffed probably the most. We'll see how those work. But the actual buffs they did list were just like kind of hilariously nothing. Like I think long zoom snipers got an aim assist nerf or aim assist buff, but they did not get PvE damage back. They're still the same PvE damage they are right now, and that's something I know a lot of people wanted to see. Scout rifles did not get any sort of damage buff. They also got an aim assist buff to some extent. It sounds pretty minor from what I'm seeing. And then my favorite, and by favorite I mean least favorite, is the rocket launcher buff that gives 1 or 2 extra reserves. I misread this at first and I thought it was extra 1 or 2 in the magazine. I'm like, oh, finally they did it. It's not. It's reserves, which is not the same thing at all. So any rocket launcher except Truth is still not going to have more than 1 in the base magazine. There's no damage buff to rocket launchers, nothing like that. And that I don't get it. And like I don't understand why rocket launchers can be underpowered for so long and they just don't bother buffing it at all. It 10%, I mean 15%, like anything would have been good there. There was a lack of any focus on fusions at all. I am surprised to see that they think fusions are fine, even though they're not really remotely meta in PvP or PvE for almost any activity. I think they could use some love, but no go. We there were just I understand that this might be a preview, and there could be more things to come. However, if that's true, I don't think we're going to see them until the actual patch notes, because next week the TWAB's going to be on progression. The week after that, it's going to be like, I think it's almost launch time, unless I have my weeks wrong. But it's go time, and this was supposed to be the Sandbox TWAB, which I assume would be highlighting most of the major things. And it just seems like there's so much left on the table. Like, how many exotics do we have that really, really could use some buffs, both armor and weapons wise? And then like none of that is being touched at all. That seems weird to me. One completely missing thing is any mention of any changes to any of the subclasses, which that almost never happens, especially when we're heading into an expansion this big. I know that stasis is going to be the main focus of this expansion, so that's a little, maybe that's taking priority, but it does seem sort of strange that pretty much nothing else is happening to these other subclasses, other than some of them are getting new exotics that enhance them in some way. Like I think the bottom tree Dawnblade is getting that one that burns things like that. And so there's a couple that, are changing those subclasses, but there's no actual balancing going on. My theory about this is that they're not really going to bother doing much more balancing with the current subclasses, because what they're actually working on is converting those subclasses to the stasis system. And we've already seen the stasis, kind of the little modules you get. What are they called? Like aspects and fragments. I can't even remember. I think that's what they're called. But it's essentially a mod system for the subclass, where you will find different mods and slot them into the subclasses in different ways. Eventually, all of the subclasses should work like this. And when that happens, like, that's the stuff that they're probably trying to balance and figure out behind the scenes right now. So there's not really a huge point spending a lot of time investing into balancing the current subclasses when they're just going to move over to this module thing. And we don't know how they're doing that. Right now, it's only Stasis launching with this. We don't know if they're going to do one subclass a season, like for the next year. We don't know if they're just going to save them all up and then drop all 3 of the new redesigns maybe next fall for the big expansion. But I think that's their priority with subclasses right now. So they're just kind of leaving well enough alone at the moment, and behind the scenes redesigning them to fit into the Stasis node system, which looks like a big upgrade. And that's probably one of the most exciting things I'm looking forward to in Beyond Light, is playing around with that system. So that is my theory as to why we didn't hear anything about that here. But overall, I mean, I've seen a lot of these Sandbox TWABs in my day, and this is one of the more underwhelming ones. Like, as curious as I am about the hand cannon changes, like, everything else is just, am I going to notice a 15% scout rifle aim assist buff, or like the fact that I have 1 extra rocket in my reserves? Like, I just don't see those making an impact. And maybe they're just kind of roll out larger changes later on, and maybe there's stuff that they just have yet to get to that they haven't had time to test yet. I mean, we already know that Beyond Light's been delayed once, so they had to work on stuff like that. So it's possible, just with all the new content, Sandbox stuff is just not as high of a priority. So which is why we're not seeing all that much stuff here, other than the massive hand cannon overhaul. I don't know. I guess we kind of have to see how it works in practice. I do think that the current meta was not terrible, like for the past, season or two. Like, I think it's been okay. I don't know if we need just dramatic overhauls, but some of these categories just seem, totally obvious that they need buffs, like rocket launchers, scout rifles. Like, it's the sniper nerf being reverted. Like, I don't really understand the rationale as to why none of that is being addressed, and I wish they would kind of talk a little bit more about that. They choose to talk about kind of random things and then not others, so we're just kind of like left to wonder what's going on here. The PvP meta, I guess we'll find out. I don't even know if I need to go into Adept Weapons. I don't think I saw any real excitement about that in my timeline, and when I asked why, everyone was like, I'm not going to go flawless, so who cares? So it's just not something that really lands for most people. I think people are excited to hear more about Adept Strike Weapons, which is something that more people are probably likely to get. But if it's tied behind all these, Grandmaster Nightfalls, maybe not as many people will get them as they think. And then everyone was saying, well, okay, if they're doing this and this, why aren't they doing Adept Raid Weapons? Like, that's where, kind of the original Adept idea came from to a certain extent in PvE. So we haven't heard anything about that. We know that armor is being changed to have certain raid mods and stuff, and raid weapons are supposed to be better in some capacity, but we have not heard anything about like truly adept raid weapons, just the Adept Strike Weapons, and I think those are coming next season or a season after, something like that. The idea sounds okay, the combination of these like stat increases with adept mods that increase stats further. Again, this is the problem with adept stuff, is that you get weapons for really good players that will just become even better and then let them dunk on lower tier people. Trials has many more problems than just a lack of solid flawless rewards, because that, again, it affects such a small number of the community that as much fuss as you kind of see made about Adept Weapons and Trials rewards sometimes on social media or on Twitch, the general community is not really all that into that stuff because it just doesn't affect them. I think it's good it exists. It's better than the current system, which there are very few reasons to really care about going flawless other than some materials here and there and the title once you get that, but we'll see how it goes. I'm more looking forward to that concept making its way into PvE. Again, we'll see what the patch brings. There are probably going to be more changes than what we've seen, but I am not really going to expect any super major subclass overhauls or anything like that until a later time. I'm hoping they can maybe squeeze in some more buffs here and there, but I'm not going to hold my breath. So yeah, it was a weird TWAB. I would have, if I made a video about the story trailer from earlier this week, it would have been a lot more positive because that was awesome and I loved that. And I've been listening to that soundtrack pretty much nonstop ever since that aired. So that was very cool. And I'm still very excited for Beyond Light. We are getting very close now, under 3 weeks until launch there. So yeah, it's happening. It was supposed to happen a month and a half ago, but now it's actually happening. So there'll be plenty to talk about. I don't know how I'm going to balance 2 next-gen consoles coming out and about 6 AAA games, but Destiny will be the priority. Beyond Light will be the priority, so I will be writing daily articles and making videos about that when that gets here. So until then, well, not until then, I'll keep making videos before that because there's supposed to be a good amount of stuff coming out in the run-up here to launch. So I think there's still going to be plenty more to talk about. But I will see you next time then. Thanks for watching.